It happened in the late 1960s, on a deep autumn night. In our extended family we had an uncle everyone called Sweda, meaning the elder among the younger uncles. His eldest son had reached marrying age, and a match had been arranged. The wedding was set for soon after. The groom-to-be was 3 years older than me. Since we were little, he had always let us younger kids in play, so when his wedding approached, we all pitched in to help prepare. In those days, a rural wedding required a huge amount of firewood. That day, the groom led several of us half-grown boys down into the ravine to cut wood. We had 3 wooden carts, each pulled by 2 people, one in front pulling the shafts, one behind pushing. I was paired with the groom on the same cart. By the time we loaded the 3 carts, the sky had already turned dark. Fortunately, the moon was bright, so we decided to haul the wood up the slope by moonlight, spend the night in the village at the top of the ravine, and head back to our own village the next day. The uphill path was steep. The groom had me pull from the front while he pushed from behind. At first, everyone was chatting and laughing, teasing the groom about how eager he was to get home and marry his bride. But as the carts climbed higher and the slope grew steeper, the talking died away. All that remained were heavy panting and the creaking of cartwheels over loose stones. From time to time, eerie bird cries echoed from the dark woods on both sides of the path. A sudden draft of cold wind blew across my sweat-soaked neck, sending a shiver through me. From that moment on, the cart felt heavier and heavier. I had walked this same slope many times before, sometimes alone, sometimes pulling a cart, during the commune's waterworks projects, but I had never felt so exhausted. I cursed the others in my heart for overloading the cart, gritted my teeth, and poured every ounce of strength into it. After what felt like an eternity, we finally reached the top. The moon hung high and bright, almost like daylight. We set down the shafts to rest. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. My arms, which had gripped the shafts, trembled uncontrollably. Big drops of sweat rolled down my forehead. My clothes clung to my back, and the cold wind made them feel like ice against my skin. The people from the front cart helped me up and sat me on a shaft, passing me a water bottle. Just then someone suddenly asked, "Hey, where's the groom? We haven't seen him for a while." Only then did we realize he was missing. We checked behind the cart, no one. We looked down the slope, no sign of him. The older boys asked me if he had said anything on the way up. I told them we had all been straining too hard to speak. Panic set in. The eldest among us took 2 others, and went back down the slope to search, thinking maybe he had stepped aside to relieve himself. The rest of us waited at the top. I was too exhausted, so I stayed behind. After about the time it takes to eat a meal, the 3 searchers returned empty-handed. They had gone all the way to the bottom of the slope, and found no trace of him. A lively, strong young man had simply vanished into thin air. We pulled the 3 carts to a nearby house, woke the owner, and explained what happened. People in those days were generally kind and helpful, especially since the 2 villages belonged to the same commune, and were only about 10 li apart. The host took us to their production team leader. The leader quickly roused the village's able-bodied men, and they set out with torches to search the ravine. We split into groups, each led by one of us who had been cutting wood that day, and searched the area where we had worked until dawn. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream came from the other side of the hill. We rushed over and found the groom half kneeling at the bottom of a small earthen ridge, his face buried deep in the soil. One of the older boys grabbed his arm and called his name, trying to lift him up. As he pulled, the groom's rigid body toppled backward onto the ground. Only then did we see his face clearly, covered in dirt, dried blood caked around his nose and mouth. Eyes wide open, staring lifelessly. He had stopped breathing. Someone screamed. The crowd scattered in terror. An elderly man picked up the groom's discarded jacket and gently covered his face. We who had come with him stood frozen, stunned. The young man who was about to be married had become a cold corpse in the blink of an eye. The production team leader gathered us together. He sent one person back to our village to report the news, then arranged for some older villagers to carry the body back up the slope. According to rural custom, an unmarried person who died young could not be carried in a coffin. I was the one chosen to deliver the message. It was the first time in my life I had encountered such a thing. My closest childhood companion was suddenly gone. I ran home with a strength I had never known before. The wind whistling in my ears and my own ragged breathing filling my head. I stumbled and fell, scraping my knee badly, but I didn't stop. I just got up and kept running. When I neared the village entrance, I saw Sweda in the distance, carrying water buckets on a shoulder pole. He noticed me running desperately toward him and stopped to wait. He set down the pole and stepped forward to steady me. Only then did I notice my pant leg was torn and blood was seeping from my knee. Exhausted and frantic, I struggled to catch my breath and finally managed to tell him what had happened. Soon after, people from our production team drove a hand tractor to the other village. I was completely spent and stayed home. That evening, my father returned and said the body had been brought back and placed in the brigade's cave dwelling. Unmarried people who died violently were not allowed inside family homes. What should have been a joyous wedding suddenly became a funeral. The groom's death was so strange that the whole village fell into stunned silence. Even the children who usually played noisily in the evening went home early. After 7 days of mourning, a well-known Inyang master from the region was invited to perform rituals. The master covered Sweda's house inside and out with talismans. A simple, thin coffin was hastily made by a carpenter, no lacquer, and covered with spells. Before dark, several elderly villagers quietly carried it out and buried it. Following the master's instructions, every household sprinkled a thin layer of white ash in front of their gates. It was to remain for 7 days before being swept away. After that, the village was no longer peaceful at night. Stones and tiles were thrown into people's courtyards. Some heard soft sobbing under their windows, sometimes near, sometimes far. Dogs across the village howled in response. These disturbances terrified everyone. People went home before sunset, and children who used to cry and fuss now barely dared to breathe. On the 8th day after the death, early in the morning, Sweda burst into our courtyard, his face pale with terror. He told my father that when he got up to use the latrine, he saw several large footprints in the white ash at the gate, exactly the size of his dead son's big feet. The prints showed the person had paced back and forth in front of the door for a long time. I had just woken up. When I heard Sweda's description, a chill ran through my entire body and the hair on my arms stood up. Sweda realized they could not continue living in fear of the dead. On the 21st day after the death, he invited the Inyang master again to perform a full ritual at his home. That night, a large bonfire was lit in Sweda's courtyard. Close relatives and neighbors gathered around it. The master, wearing a 5 Buddha crown and ritual robes, set up an altar in the center, rang his bell, and began the ceremony. Suddenly, a piercing scream came from the neighboring cave dwelling. A woman with disheveled hair staggered into the courtyard. It was Sweda's younger brother's wife. She had long been ill and bedridden. She rushed straight to Sweda, dropped to her knees and kowtowed deeply. Then she lifted her face and in the rough voice of a grown man wailed, "Daddy, I'm not willing to accept this. Why did it have to be me?" We were pulling the cart up the slope when several people suddenly grabbed me from behind. I tried to shout but no sound came out. They dragged me to a place and kept stuffing dirt into my mouth and nose. "Ah, Daddy." Her heart-wrenching cries could supposedly be heard several li away. Even now, remembering them sends chills down the spine. The Inyang master was so frightened he nearly lost his composure. Sweda, tears streaming down his face, helped his sister-in-law to her feet, and said in a broken voice, "My son, this is fate. You have already passed on. No matter what you say, nothing can be changed. Your father will find you a wife down below so you won't be lonely. Go in peace and stop haunting us. Everything your father promises he will do." The old man comforted and pleaded with him repeatedly. Finally, the woman's eyes rolled back and she fainted. Sweda's younger brother carried his wife home. How Sweda later arranged a ghost marriage for his son, outsiders never knew. But after that night, the strange disturbances in the village stopped completely. Over time, the whole incident gradually faded from memory.